I made a lot of videos of printing plates, so you can always look at those, but this is really hard because it's got that black ground on it, and I can't tell. I really can't tell how I'm doing, because usually I have some black ink tone to look at. Now the most I have is a little bit of reflection, but I'm going to print it anyway. Interesting way to work, and I love surprises. I'm printing on a Fabriano paper, and I soaked it for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. Then I blotted off all the excess water. I'm printing on the press that's going to my friend. I warmed the plate before I printed. I set the pressure using 2 hands. You're never sure about the pressure till you printed a print. Incidentally, when I'm done with this video, I'll probably put it in the Press Ghost, which is this flash drive that I build into all my half-wood presses now. It has lots of videos on it, books and things. And I always put on a moment number for my game Proximates. Let's see, this is the year is 11, the month is 11, the day is the 15th, and it's 17:30. There it is. A little weird, but pretty good start. Very dark. And this area up in here, which is all supposed to be black, will have to take some reworking, and that'll be for the next part of the video. When you that next part is about going back into the plate, and you could etch it, or you could dry point, you could do aquatint. I'm going to demonstrate dry pointing because my friend, I think my friend wants to do dry point, and that's a very direct process. Now that you've got the image going and you've got a trial proof, you can make some judgments and start doing the dry point, and then as you go along you can work on it. And I might also strip that photo ground or that laser tone off of there to make it a little easier to see what you're doing when you're doing the dry point. I think that's a good idea. To get that toner off, you work with lacquer thinner, and so with lacquer thinner you want to have plenty of ventilation going. A fan, go outside, whatever you can do, but don't breathe the stuff. It'll rot your brain and make you paranoid. Clean it out real well. Soft, stiff brush. Try not to scratch the plate very much, but we can always remove scratches with the burnisher later on. At this stage, there's a product you can use, rubbing compound from automobile paint finishing product, and there's one for printmakers called Putz Pomade. But if you can polish your plate with this stuff, and you'll begin to see how the image really looks without that black background on it. In my workshop I have a buffing wheel, so if I want to I can really put a high polish on this before I go to the next step, which is to use some dry point. Now you can see what it would look like if you ink it, and I like to etch the plate very lightly with the photo images on it, because I'm not that crazy about simply reproducing a photograph. But the photograph, as I said, gives me a start when it's a person. I'm not that great at portraiture. And it also gives you the basis for your soft ground, which is coming. Now what I've done is I've spread ink into it, and this is tarlatan fabric. It's a stiff cheesecloth-like material, so it doesn't soak up the oils of the ink, but it traps the excess ink and distributes it. I learned this method from one of the people that bought my press. She showed me to do this. It's a slow process, And I'm not going to print this yet. I'm going to print it when I really don't know what it looks like, after I do some dry point. After so much of this tarlatan, you can bring it up even brighter with telephone book pages. That's going to give you the most contrast. A dry point, the term simply means there's no liquids involved. There's no mordants, no ferric chloride, no acids, and so forth. It used to be a touch-up technique in the old days when they would do an etching or an engraving, and they saw some places that needed to be changed. They didn't go back and bother with all the etching. They just take a needle to it and fix it. I think that's the story, the history of dry point. Remember, printmaking was always a reproduction process until modern art came along. Now, what's bothered me about this print for a long, this image, has been this area here, which is all shadow. He's wearing a hat. My friend is wearing a hat, and the hat is making this shadow all over here. And since it was solid in the laser print, it was completely protected. And I would normally, if I were doing a straight etching, I would use aqua tint in this area and make it rough so that it trapped ink nicely. But I'm going to stick with dry point because I feel like it. After you've made some scratches with this, I'm using what they call a Whistler style etching needle. Sometimes it's called a scribe. And from here on out, you're going to be using a scribe like this, an etching needle. Sometimes it's what's called a scraper, and another one called a burnisher. But first, before I can sort of look at this thing, I wanted to get these areas that are supposed to be dark, make them dark. Now, I might be making them too dark. I don't know yet until I rub ink into it, wipe them off again. And this is where I think the real creative process starts. It's when you are working back into the image, the camera image, the photo image. Now if I rub ink into it and wipe it off again, it's looking more like it's supposed to, like there's a shadow under his hat. The use of the dry point makes the texture of the picture look entirely different. So there's going to be a lot of needlework, a lot of dry point from here on out, where I'll be going back over and trying to create some harmony between the handmade lines and the camera lines. At some point, the dry point and your drawing takes over and practically eliminates the photo image. But that's an artistic process, and there's really not much more I can say about that.
Now I like to sit down and focus more and use the other tools like the burnisher and the scraper primarily. You think of these as being sort of like erasers, and of course the needle is more like the drawing tool. When you do dry point, it's really just a little burr that you're throwing up with the needle. The needle throws up a burr like a plow going through the field, throwing up a furrow. And it's the burr that actually catches the ink, and it gives dry point that typical kind of soft look people talk about. And the opposite of that is the scraper, which takes off the burr, but it leaves that little fine line. So you're building up a kind of a webwork of lines and burrs. The burnisher is similar. It flattens the burr out, polishes the plate. So if you have highlights in the image, the burnisher brings out those highlights even more. there's a technique called mesotent, which uses exclusively the burnisher, a whole set of different burnishers, and a plate that's a complete web of burrs. Oh, I picked up the scraper by accident, and I was going to pick up the needle, but I should mention too that the tip of the scraper is needle sharp, and so it can be a drawing tool. My goal is to basically eliminate the photograph and replace it with my own drawing. It would help if I had the person here sitting as a portrait, and then I'd have a little more feeling for the real individual, or I could have a photograph sitting in front of me and kind of guide my decisions. But the etched-in image in the background is an interesting way to start. Might not be for everybody, but my point of this video is to show one approach. And, as I showed before, periodically you can put some ink back in there and check your progress, see what kind of changes are happening. It's still too soon to take a print. I think it probably, at this point, looks pretty awful. It's going to be a contest between the original image, the photograph, and out there somewhere in the world is a photographer who's probably incensed that I would use her or his photograph this way, but that's all I have to go on right now. This is not for publication, not without permission from the artist, the photographer behind that original image. This is called the hand wipe. We use that in printing mezzotents quite often for dry points, and mezzotents quite often. The hand is the really nice tool for wiping the plate. You can see the softness in the image. Up in here you can see the soft lines. It's just sort of shadowy. I'm getting curious about what this will look like as a print, so it's a feeling you get. You think, gosh, I wonder, maybe there's a nice print in there. Do you think? The other side I haven't touched, and so we've got a good idea as to how one of these photo etchings look without any dry point. Pretty light, but shows me where I am on this plate. Shows me I've got a lot more work to do if I were to continue, but this is just a little teaching video to get somebody started, and I'm not going to take this any further. I think you get the point. Thanks for watching. I'm Bill Ritchie.